Now, I'm a DJ. I have a radio show in Prague, and I've worked in clubs for a long time. And I find social media to be very similar to dancing. Dancing is something that you do alone. I mean, you're yourself and you're dancing there. Nobody wants to be the one who's in the middle of the dance floor dancing, right? People like instead to have a crowd around them. They like to be together with other people and interacting with those other people. But it's a very lonely thing if you're the first. There are generally two factors that influence success in new media projects. One is that you have to be first to market. The people who are first are the ones that people get used to, okay? But the other one is that you have to have the ability to execute and come out with new features that people find interesting. Now, the Facebook that we have today is very different than the Facebook we had 3 or 4 years ago. And Facebook is constantly coming up with new features and new ways to interest their readers. They change they redesign their site every 6 months or so, and everybody says, rah, 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 I hate the new design. But then everybody gets used to it and they continue using it. Now, why is Facebook so useful? It's because your friends are on it.
Do you think that there will be no need for the journalism schools? Or?
I think the journalism schools need to redefine their definitions of quality. Also, they need to redefine the role of the journalist in a networked environment. When people can give feedback directly to what the journalist had to say, their role changes a bit. Now, the world always needs storytellers, and the storytellers may not necessarily be in the way that was defined when journalism schools were first created. I'm not a big fan of journalism schools in general. I think that people would be better served if they became experts on a certain topic and then started writing about those topics. Literature and history and art, or even mathematics and physics. That, I think, is something that a lot of journalism schools tend to forget. However, there is a need for, of course, professionalism in media. There's, of course, a need for professionalism among journalists. And that's one of the things that a journalism school can provide. But should journalists have a monopoly on the truth? They never did. And they probably never will. And instead, what is happening now is that because anyone can tell their stories, it's not being filtered by anyone. It is unmediated. And it's more democratic in this way. And journalists who understand this are experimenting with these new forms so that they can also learn how to tell their stories better.
So what about, for example, some specific people who work in the specific field, for example, physicists, using that the physicist can tell his story in a way that's understandable for the general audience?
Well, that's up to the
language?
That's up to the audience to decide. If this physicist tells his story in a really compelling manner that gets people excited about nuclear physics or whatever he's talking about, then fantastic, more power to him. But this is something that the audience decides. And here's another thing that is very significant about the new media as opposed to the old ones. The metrics, the ability to actually monitor how many people are reading an article, for example, or have viewed a video, that gives you direct and instantaneous feedback about the consumption of that media. That's also different. Usually it was before that the only way that people could give feedback to a news article was that they would write a letter to the editor, or maybe a columnist would write a column about that. But now that's changed, and we have many different metrics now for gauging the impact or the interest in a given article.
What about the advertisement? How should the editors of the new media, for example, attract the attention of the advertisers? And will it be a threat in the future for the new media to get dependent on the sources of finance?
Well, the media are changing, and this also means that advertising is changing. There's a TV series that's very popular in the United States right now called Mad Men, which is describing life in an advertising agency in the United States in 1960 or 1963, I think. But that model of the old advertising agency is also being exploded. And the advertising agencies are also having to redefine how best to reach their audiences to sell their products or their clients' products. So it's not just the journalists who are being redefined in this process, it's also the advertisers. And some things are turning out to be more effective. Take Google AdWords as a product, for example, in that you don't pay for the ad until someone clicks on it. You know, that is very different than the old model of, let's spend $1 million on a television ad starring Michael Jackson. People in the media need to be doing a lot more experimenting than they're doing right now.
Is there any danger in making such experiments?
Well, it depends on how you do them. One thing that I recommend to my clients is to try to keep the costs of your experiments low. If they work, great. But if they don't, you're not going to go bankrupt by doing so. Now, this is different than the approach of big, large media organizations. Look at how much money Rupert Murdoch is spending on his new media ventures. Some of them are successful, but when they're not successful, he's under pressure from his shareholders to come up with profit. And this is, you know, something that smaller media organizations are able to do faster and more effectively. If someone waits 5 years to get into the Georgian internet market, it will be a lot more expensive and it will require a lot more effort. This is definitely the time to be very active in making new media in Georgia, and especially in creating quality media that people will care about.